Welcome to Slow Tech. I'm your host, Adam Yasmin. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Joe Hollier, co-founder of Light. Light are a Brooklyn-based team responsible for introducing the world to the Lightphone, which has been making a lot of headlines in recent years. Whatever you think about dumb phones or smartphone alternatives, the Lightphone is a compelling device with an even more compelling ethos, touching on digital minimalism and time well spent. Remember that Slow Tech is a podcast that is dedicated to exploring these philosophies. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe. Support the creation of these conversations and the community on Substack. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And enjoy today's conversation. Amazing. Here we are. Joe, thank you for being here. You are the inaugural Slow Tech podcast guest. So thank you so much for being here.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having us, or me.
I feel like I'm in an interesting sort of mini time loop in the sense where when I last spoke to you in this kind of any similar podcast scenario, it was for my older show, which is now in hibernation, called Wabi-Sabi. This was in the depths of lockdown, if I remember correctly. This was probably September of 2020. And you guys had probably just released Lightphone 2 or were in the process of releasing it. And so we are in this other kind of chrysalis moment. You've recently made the Lightphone 3 announcement, which is really stunning, by the way. And so here we are, getting the chance to speak to you in this kind of post-announcement, pre-release cycle, if you will. How are you feeling?
I would say we're so excited. I'm sure that's a kind of cliche answer, but I think we've spent the last 4 or 5 years that the Lightphone 2 has been out there. It started shipping just before the pandemic, taking in so much feedback from users, the good and the bad, and both users that were able to stick with the Lightphone and make it their daily driver, and other users who, for whatever reasons, hardware, software, otherwise, weren't able to make it stick. And so I feel like we've been kind of sitting on our hands, really excited to talk about this device, feeling really confidently that it addressed a lot of the concerns or feedback very directly. So it's been really exciting to let the cat out of the hat, so to speak. And I think so far the reaction, especially from these users, have been so generous, giving us the feedback, is ringing really true to what they sort of hope to see in a phone. And I think we feel like it really addresses a portion of the market that there isn't really a good solution for right now, sort of in between the Lightphone 2 being, the super minimal, intentionally very slow device, and, still keeping all that ethos, but making something that's a little bit more premium, and for someone coming from a flagship iPhone that can kind of, really help them maintain that level of productivity when it comes to sending messages and these things without, bringing the entire internet into the small phone. So we're really excited. It's been a little bit of a nonstop, inquiries coming in, questions about the phone, excitement, disappointment even. But it's, we're just grateful that people care and are interested still in what we're doing.
Yeah, that it's such a it can be approached as a topic of conversation from so many different angles, whether people appreciate it or dislike it or have criticism or, like it's been really fascinating to have this sort of peripheral, um, perspective, just within the field at large. Um, and this field of digital minimalism and again what I'm liking uh, to call slow tech and just intentional tech use is still very much in its kind of infancy, and yet with a, I mean, I'd say beyond a device. I mean, like, I feel like the light phone kind of is more like a, dare I say, almost a culture than a device. It can't just be pigeonholed into a device. So it's been really amazing to see this evolution, from version one, which, if I remember correctly, it was described as like a phone away from phone. It was like something that people could maybe use on the weekends, or like if you're on a date, or if you really want to minimize, your distractions as you're stepping out of the house. How that evolved into Lightphone 2, and how Lightphone 2 has been this, for better, for lack of a better description, this kind of standalone device, right? A real leap from version one. And I'm curious, with now the evolution into version three. I mean, how long had version three been in? Yeah, how long has that been in incubation?
It's hard to say exactly when we felt like we really had a tangible new model, but I would say as early as we started shipping, we started gathering feedback. So to some degree, it's kind of always been starting to ferment and become a thing. But at least 12 months ago, we brought on an industrial designer to help us start imagining what this feedback might look like. Uh, and really exploring different form factors and things like that. And I think probably the hardest part was finding the right screen,
Mm,
both from a technology standpoint of like wanting it to have the ethos and aesthetic, but really I think the size was the biggest concern and the hardest part of it, because if you're just looking at screens that exist on the open market, they're either really small, like the screen on the Lightphone 2, or they're, essentially meant to be used as a smartphone. So they're going to be 16:9 in their orientation and usually well over 4, 5, 6+ inches, as you see in most smartphones. So
yeah.
uh, that was a months long process to, vet different screens, get quotes on what making a custom screen would be, and then finally landing on the screen that we found, which we're so grateful and excited about. And then really kind of, building the phone around there. Um, so yeah, it's been at least 12 months that it's been getting more and more tangible. And then late last year, we kicked off with our manufacturing partner. So really taking it seriously, you know, investing money into deposits so that they could kick off their R&D. And that's when we started doing some of the mechanical engineering, making the PCB, figuring out how the antennas could fit in the form factor, and really nitpicking a lot of these design decisions. So when we launched it, a few weeks ago on June 11th, we launched what we feel will be very close to the final product. Where previously, when we've done crowdfunding for the first two models, there was so many more unknowns, and we hadn't actually kicked off at R&D, and we were looking to crowdfunding to help us in that process. So it's been great to have this confidence and technical answers to the questions that people have, not just a lot of unknowns. But I think what we were craving from the crowdfunding era was the user pool, people to
Mhm.
actually get feedback from. We knew we wanted a camera, but the devil's in the details and how we make it a light camera experience. And people have so many opinions, and it's been great for us to start to digest those. And that's just one sort of angle. And we'll continue to use surveys and just, collecting ongoing feedback, whether that's emails or some of these other channels like Reddit, that users share their ideas and experience. So we're excited to have, this direction going and moving full speed, but also now this base of users to help us prioritize, like, this is the feature that actually people want more than this.
Yeah.
And that's, our reality is a small team. We can't deliver everything at once, like maybe Apple might be able to pull off. So we'd rather err conservative and say, for launch, it will look like this. And then we can help
Yeah.
prioritize what makes sense to escalate to next.
There's, I'm hearing this process, and I hope that, listeners will be listening to this process. And it's really, I mean, I don't think as listeners, as really, as the uneducated in what it takes to go from an idea to a physical product on the market. I can't even fully fathom what that journey is like. And I know that, I mean, as you describe, it's a small team, but I know that you craft that ethos in an amazing and transparent way, and you really show kind of what goes into the product, and that you have this really there is a vibrant culture and community surrounding not just the device, but light as a culture, without one centralized kind of channel, if you will. Like there isn't like a Discord server with 10, with 5,000 Lightphone owners who send in their feedback. There's kind of like, there's this amazing uh, capability of sort of, again, foraging for like all of the, again, whether it's through surveys or through social media channels or like email feedback, or it's amazing to just to take stock in how all of that can be wielded together again without one sort of centralized communication channel to develop new products, to bring new phones to the marketplace. Like it's again, when you think of, other standalone devices, in a competitive marketplace, uh, it is kind of very David versus Goliath, again, for lack of a better metaphor. Um, how would you begin to reflect on like just again the growing community of again, whether it's Lightphone owners or just digital minimalists who appreciate who may or may not have a device but just like are sort of down for the cause? Like how would you begin to reflect on that community?
Well, I think it's really cool to see that actually the community is incredibly diverse and you can't really put them into one demographic bucket.
Mm.
We see an interest from artists and creative types, which I sort of was my initial hypothesis, but we have like a really big interest in the Bible Belt community amongst families, whether that's a parent buying it for their child or actually a parent trying to be a better role model and to be more present for those very early years of their kid, years before they are even considering giving them a phone. We get, celebrities organically picking up and using the phone, and students who want to focus, are spending all this money on their thesis and want to give it 100%. So, I think that diversity is just so interesting to me. I think so often in this day and age, products, brands, ideas get so, echo chambered and siloed off. And it's cool to see an idea like the Lightphone resonate across a lot of these, standard lines that typically divide. And I think that speaks to the universal feeling that we are feeling as like a sort of culture right now. Um, it's always been growing this kind of backlash, so to speak, against smartphones and the way that technology in our current relationship, or the average relationship, is really sort of harming our mental health, taking away our attention span, and really increasing our anxiety, as I'm sure most people can relate to. And the community is interesting because it's not just diverse, but not everyone is a user.
Yeah.
A lot of people get interested in the Lightphone and then realize maybe this other phone is better for them, but they still are in our Lightphone conversations, contributing ideas, you know, feedback, encouragement for other users. Sometimes it's just a matter of stripping down their own smartphone and sharing tips about that. And I think that's so cool that it's not just like a light cult. Rather, it's a
Yeah.
conversation. And, you know, people ask, well, for your needs, maybe this phone might be better, or like you could try that. And I just think that's so cool that it's not just some Kool-Aid drinking cult, but like, you know, people that are, you know, critical of the Lightphone, or at least understanding of where it makes sense and maybe doesn't make as much sense. Um, and so, you know, we've been really grateful. And I think one thing I feel like it's very unique to this time in our company. I mean,
Mm.
I'm sure we'd love to see it grow, but the fact that we have this kind of small scale, like really small team. You know, I think there's just barely 10 of us working on Light, which is like infinitely less than probably any other phone maker, makes it
Yeah.
so that I am seeing visibility across all of the channels. Kaiway is seeing visibility across all the channels. When we get together as a team, we're all sitting around one dinner table. Um,
Yeah.
we haven't expanded beyond that. So there's this really great kind of efficiency and knowledge share that happens at this size. And I think users, you know, on one hand, like I said, we're a small team and it takes us a while to roll out software. But on the other hand, I think unique to Lightphone is that users feel heard. Um,
Mm.
I've had users directly email me a simple suggestion for, you know, an improvement to the phone that I was just immediately like, that's brilliant. And then maybe a few months later, they see their idea implemented in the device, send them
Yeah.
a thank you note, letting them know, and they're so excited and feel a part of it. And you know, you just can never imagine that happening at Apple or Samsung. That, you know, the co-founder would hear your idea and then you'd see Apple actually implement it. Maybe coincidentally, Apple's research has led them to solve your problem in the specific way. But I think we're really grateful for that relationship we have. And I think I'm a little bit afraid that if we do start to scale, how we can try to maintain that is sort of something I'm kind of always thinking about.
I mean, that speaks to your personal, it says a lot about just how you empathize with other people, like not just as a co-founder of Light, but as a human being, because I think at the end of the day, it's easy to forget that you and I, people listening to this, like people who are going to be considering the Lightphone or Lightphone 3, or even just how they relate to their device in any different way. We forget that we're human beings having like a human experience. And that's really what I want to get into, and what I'm excited to get into with this podcast in particular. Because if we don't share these human experiences, again, either through devices, through tech, adjacent to tech, um, it's easy to kind of slip away, and it slips away more and more over time. So, you know, I I would say, just to respond to what you're saying here for a second, to look back, because what, Light's been around for 10 years or more,
Almost 10, yeah.
almost
Kaiway
10
and I
years.
met in September would be 10 years, and then May was 9 years of our Kickstarter. So
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, if you think back at like what, I mean, going back to version 1, and just to kind of see where your ideas turn into version 1, and then all this feedback turn into version 2, and now onto version 3. I think as you grow at whatever the pace is, I think I can naively but confidently say that you will maintain that ethos of yeah, beyond connectivity. It sounds like it's a really kind of almost modular sort of philosophy of we keep things small. Our team is small. We can sit around a dinner table. We can We can exchange ideas. There isn't a long sort of distance to communicate ideas. People are emailing you directly. There's the multiple channels that are easy to interact with. I just think I again, it just sounds from the outside, it just looks so exciting. I'm sure it's also nerve wracking and very challenging to, again, we're talking about, at the end of the day, we're talking about hardware devices and, um, you know, what that, what are the other costs to, to these devices? So even just to kind of like, actually to bookmark that for a second, have there is there feedback from the community discussing what the sort of environmental cost of bringing a new device to market? Can you would you like to speak to again, considering beyond efficiency, but any like recyclable components or you know components that maybe could be treated in a modular way where things can be sort of added to the device, the base device, instead of like thinking about a whole nother device somewhere down the line in the future.
Yeah, I'd say, sustainability is such a trendy and almost overused word, but
Yeah.
it's something that really matters to Kai and I. I think the first time I saw a pallet of original light phones there in a box, I said, wow, my idea is responsible for this being created. And there's something
Yeah.
obviously beautiful and profound in seeing your idea brought to life. But there was this other feeling of responsibility of, if this product doesn't live up to its value proposition and deliver on the promise and becomes e-waste rather than a useful tool that helps people ground themselves, well, that didn't really sit well with me or Kai. Um, I think we've always been afraid of greenwashing, so to speak, which is,
Sure.
very trendy. So we've always been hesitant to overpromise on our sustainability goals. But I think fundamentally, when it comes to planned obsolescence, which is a really disgusting but incredibly common practice of brands intentionally throttling their older models with the intention of selling you a new model, even though realistically that previous model, in this case phone, probably had many years of potential life left. And
Yeah.
Apple was called out and was really clever in their PR dodging of this. I can't believe more people weren't so fundamentally upset, but they were literally throttling their old phones with
Yeah.
software to make them seem slow so that when you got the new phone, you said, oh my God, I need this phone. It's so much snappier. When it
Yeah.
was actually a fabrication that the original phone was capable of being that fast. And they had intentionally done that. And that I think is one of the most offensive things, not just out of respect for your customer, um, but especially with environmental impact. So even though the Lightphone 2 doesn't have a ton of unique, sustainable aspects to it, unfortunately, with our limited budgets, we're just barely lucky to deliver a phone at all. We
Yeah.
don't have the luxury of spending months trying to think of how we could rework the screen to be more replaceable or these other parts. Um, but I think the fact that we still support the phone almost 5 years later,
Yeah.
ongoing software updates, and we've never upselled a model. And to that point, actually, the Lightphone 3 isn't a direct upgrade. And we hope many users keep their Lightphone 2 and keep
Yeah.
using it for years to come. So I think on the software level, this planned obsolescence is one way that we feel we really embody that mission. And then going into the Lightphone 3, we learned a lot. Um, and so, though we still don't have this grandiose research and development budget, we made a couple of decisions like a removable battery. Um, and so, basically, on the back of the Lightphone 3, there's 4 screws, and it's very obvious that this back plate comes off, and a user would be able to change the battery after a couple of years if that started to degrade. And That is unfortunately the one component of the Lightphone 2 that inevitably will degrade. And as it stands, it's not possible for us to offer or guarantee replacements of the battery on a one-to-one basis. So
Yeah.
being able to improve that was, for us an immediate big win that meant the potential lifespan wasn't 4 years more or less, but now could potentially, be multiples of that.
Yeah.
And then across the hardware, we tried to future proof it as much as possible, which, you know, adding more hardware bells and whistles sounds a little bit ironic for the light phone, but our intentions weren't to make this a smartphone, obviously, but so that if in 6 years, you know, thinking way long term, this component could be used in a way, maybe another lockdown happens and we need this thing. And if our phone didn't support it, we'd have to create a whole new model. And we wanted to, as much as possible, make this phone so that someone could have it 3, 5, 10 years. I'm not trying to overpromise that the phone can last that long, but that's the question we kept posing back to ourselves. Like, the networks, will they be supported for 10 years? Yes, we believe so. The
Hmm.
battery can be replaced. Yes. So, like, things like using metal, the fastest, latest chips, the most modern antennas, USB-C. So, all of these things were an attempt to future proof it so that hopefully this phone can last you the test of time.
Yeah, and even to again in this current state of the world, thinking of a device's lifespan, like I don't think it's something that a lot of people think about. I mean, I have the 15th generation iPhone. I subscribe with a company called Visible, which is like a subset of Verizon. They are so happy to like, you should upgrade every year. Like it just doesn't, it's just part of this huge washing machine. Like I watch myself get caught up in that at certain times, and again, in full transparency, I'm not a full-time Lightphone user, which is what excited me to talk to you about Lightphone 3. And in coming into this, bringing sort of breathing life into this podcast in particular, like to be a resource, to be a conversation, an ongoing conversation for people who are on the periphery, who are curious about aspects of digital minimalism, about humane
Sure.
tech, um, about alternative devices that really can, not to think of them in a competitive nature, this versus that, this or that, but just like kind of, it's like moving towards this kind of, again, this ethos, this lifestyle. Uh, I'd like us to do a little side tangent here and ask you about, I didn't write down in my notes the name, but is it the League of Big Tech? Can
Oh,
we
the
talk about that?
Alliance of Big Tech.
The Alliance of
Our
Big Tech.
marketing hamster.
Yeah. Yeah. Like how, I mean, again, if it's too on the nose to talk about it, we could talk around it. But uh, how's that been? How have people responded to the Alliance of Big Tech? I've seen a couple of the billboards. I saw at least one of them here in LA, and I've seen photos. I've seen the marketing campaign shared around different social media channels. What brought you guys to that? And is that purely an internal like team effort, or is that like a sort of a partnered effort?
Yeah, I mean, I would say at the highest level, marketing the light phone, we've always used less traditional means.
Yeah.
One reason is, morally, we like the idea that we're not just reinvesting in the very platforms that we're so critical of day in and out with our message. Um, but there's the other reality, which is that we don't have the resources to either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we've relied so much on kind of the grassroots word of mouth, the fact that someone goes out in the world with a light phone and other people are curiously like, is that a phone? And then, spark usually a larger conversation about technology than just, does it have Bluetooth? How much does it cost? It's, a much more interesting, wide conversation. And these couple of times we have decided to spend a little bit of money um, on marketing campaigns. So the previous one was called Dear Tim, sort of in the same world, but to sort of speak to what the Alliance of Big Tech was that we created a fake, semi-fake organization. I think people kind of do recognize that there is big tech as an entity. And the entire goal of this Alliance of Big Tech was to discourage people from buying the Lightphone. Do not buy the Lightphone. Paid for by the Alliance of Big Tech. And we used, you know, clever language to try to sarcastically explain why big tech doesn't want you to buy the Lightphone. The Lightphone claims to support happiness, but it can't even tell you how to buy it. You know, obviously, your smartphone claiming in there that you can buy happiness, which the Lightphone would say you cannot. But maybe by putting down your phone, you might experience a more present and hopefully happy life. So, it was through this sort of clever branding, we just wanted to try to get a bigger reach. Realistically, we only had a handful of billboards actually put up. So
Yeah.
it's true that you say you saw it probably more on social media than
Yeah.
in real life, and because it's really, down to resources. So we tried to project
Yeah.
using photography and sharing it online, the message as far as possible, but sort of grounding it in that we actually did go up and put up a couple of those billboards, and a decent amount. And I should mention that these two projects in particular were a collaboration with one of our investors. They're an agency in addition to being an investor, and so sort of pro bono, they did really help us ideate and execute that. But it's always from a voice of things we were already doing that they helped us sort of pivot that into a more specific campaign, and helped us financially pull it off, which is really cool.
Yeah. No, it definitely, I mean, again, from this distance, like it was this amazing thing to be pulled off. And I'm so curious to know if there were any like really interesting responses, either from a big tech company or another phone, or just like what were, if there were any like just interesting takeaways or responses from that campaign.
I guess maybe it's specific to me, but I thought it was quite funny that some close friends of mine didn't realize it was a joke at first, that I had actually created the posters, and they were like, "Oh my God, Joe, there's actually people out there
They're coming
paying."
after you.
And they like almost got not quite conspiracy theorists, but they're like, "I knew they would eventually come for you, Joe." And I was like, I thought the sarcasm was more obvious, but I guess they just saw Lightphone and knew me and just kind of like reacted more emotionally than fully reading the joke of it. So that
Yeah.
was pretty funny.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Just hearing that, like the people could get, it's kind of like when you think about how a magic trick works, right? How the magician knows how the trick works and how they're kind of fooling you or convincing you to believing the illusion. That campaign, from that kind of metaphor perspective, was like you were the magician and the magic and the magic act itself, kind of blended together. That's amazing.
Contextually, too, the project happened, I wouldn't say like in an in-between phase, but the Lightphone 2 had existed for a couple of years. We didn't have any huge advancements coming in terms of new tools or OS, and we wanted to really elevate the conversation but not make it so specific to the device. So, kind of back to what you were saying, it's like we hope the culture and conversation isn't just like about the hardware spec of one specific
Yeah.
Lightphone model, but rather why someone might want to get away from the smartphone. And so for us, the campaign wasn't so much about selling phones as about starting to get some wheels turning in people's minds. And I think one thing we've learned is that the light phone isn't a spontaneous purchase.
Yeah.
People don't tend to just go online and buy it because, unlike maybe a pair of shoes, it asks for a more significant lifestyle change.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, sort of technical hurdles people have to think through, from, annoying questions like, will it work with my carrier, to like, what about this and how am I going to maybe do that? And they have to balance, is it worth the potential friction that it might bring in some slivers of your life for the potential overall benefit of getting off of your smartphone? And or is there a sort of hybrid way that you might use the light phone in addition to other smart devices like a phone or maybe a tablet, computer? So we do see this kind of like long arc of 3, 6 months, multiple years in some cases, of people that have followed the project, thought about it, and then, they read a new book, they see the Social Dilemma film, maybe they have a couple of personal experiences where they found themselves really vulnerable to the device in an unhealthy way. And that culmination eventually causes them to say, I'm ready to take the plunge.
Yeah. And again, with Lightphone 3, and to speak to this parent's, personal experience of like, I need a digital wallet, I need a camera to do so and so, I need a screen to show a QR code or blah blah blah. Um, I I really can see myself using the Lightphone 3 and not needing to rely on, my iPhone anymore, and, giving back this lease phone that I don't even own, this phone that I, you know what I mean? And I could see, our daughter's turning 9, in a few weeks. I could see that, like, the Lightphone 2 is going to be her first phone, for sure. And so I can see this kind of, in our household, this kind of multiple generation of light light phones being utilized, in their respective capacities, which is super exciting. So like, if you need another, if you need a beta tester set, let me know. But that's, that aside, another thing I'd love to talk to you about, before we begin to close this conversation, or at least to bookmark it, hopefully, for, talking to you, like maybe once it's actually released, come January. I'd love to talk to you about an aspect of the community that I'm sure that you've been interacting with, that had to do with schools and phones, whether banning smartphones. There's the COSA Act, Kids Online Safety Act. There's all this kind of like slow rolling, but kind of legislation with momentum that's happening, as we speak in real time. There's the author, what's his name, Jonathan Haidt, came out with the Anxious Generation. There's Human Tech's Social Dilemma. There's a lot of, like, again, within the culture, at scale, there's a lot of conversation around, like, kids, smartphones, schools. And so when I saw the piece about gosh, the name of the school right now starts with a B. Was it right in
Buxton,
Massachusetts?
probably, yeah.
Buxton, thank you. When I saw that piece, it was a really great, thoughtful piece about Buxton School banning smartphones, but in the wake of the ban, adopting basically Lightphone 2 for everyone, staff and student alike. Again, within a contained environment, right? An environment of, let's say, several hundred people. I was really amazed to read about it, to learn about it, and then to see and pay attention to like other similar um, sort of use cases, or examples, kind of sprouting in different corners. Um, how much of that, the Buxton School, how much of that was a collaborative project between Light and them, or was it just something that they came to you like, here's our idea, and you said, cool, let's get you these devices?
Well, they did come to us, and they weren't actually the first school to approach us at a high level with a similar idea. to at least understand what might be possible. Unfortunately, it never really become tangible or possible with other schools. As you can
Yeah.
imagine, there's a lot of hurdles, and Buxton is very unique in that it is a private school,
Yeah.
fairly wealthy, so financially it seemed like something they could try. And they were pretty progressive in their teachings, all like the way that they structure the school at large. So it wasn't a completely, out of left field concept. And it was one
Yeah.
that, they felt the parents of those students would be on board for something like this. So, they'd reached out to Kaiway and I, and we started the conversation at the end of the previous semester. And I think we probably sent them a dozen or two phones to do a much small scale sort of trial so the head of school himself could use the phone and see if it was even possible.
Hmm.
And that went pretty well. So coming into the September school year that year, that was when we were able to actually kick it off. For scale, it's still actually quite a small school. I believe there's about 80 total participants,
Mm.
including about 15 faculty,
Hmm.
65 or so students. Um, so, it was a really good size for us to kind of try this. And I think we were super interested in this possibility, but also a little bit nervous about whether it would actually work, or if in a week
Yeah.
they'd be saying, hey, we're sending these phones back. It's not going to work out. Um, Both from like, the students themselves, the communication amongst teachers. I think there was some concerns about like, but we use Google this for our meetings,
Yeah.
how are we going to get around that? Some like actual logistical things, but actually, it proved to be pretty much beneficial almost out the gate.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of assumed that there would be some positive results in the classroom. I think that was maybe more of an obvious assumption in it. And I think what was really interesting was socially how much it made a difference. How they really take pride on these shared meal times that the whole school sits down, staff and students. A lot of times, even collaborating on who is doing dishes or cooking the meal and taking turns with these chores. But they had felt that mealtime had become these kind of little echo chamber bubbles where kids were
Yeah.
just on their phone and getting really clicky. These kids sitting over here, these kids over there, they're maybe chatting with each other, and almost, like things like bullying and other things were manifesting prior to the Lightphone experiment. And they felt like once Lightphone came, it kind of leveled the playing field where, people couldn't just avoid conversation and drift off into their phone, even if they were in like the community room hanging. Now they had to, hey, what's up? I'm Joe. I'm so and so, and get to know each other, and it just set the tone for a vastly different school year. Um,
Yeah.
the students themselves had a lot of really critical feedback about the phone. It's slow, it's ugly, and I wish it was this, I wish it was that, which was really funny. But when we dove into it, they were all really able to acknowledge and see the benefit that came from it. And I think because it was isolated to their school year and correlating with it, they knew that like come the summer, come college, they might be getting their smartphones back. So I think they were able to see it as like, this is just for me to focus for this time. And they were really, team players about it. And
Yeah.
um, the experiment proved to be, I'd say mutually beneficial. Buxton, it kind of put a stake in the ground for the philosophy of that school and the things that they prioritize and value as a school, both community and the sort of more rigorous education that comes with, a class of focused students, an intimate class at that. But also for Lightphone, we saw a lot of interest from other schools and parents. And, I mean, even individual adults watched that video and were moved to want to get a Lightphone
Yeah.
without anything to do with school or children. I think they were like, wow, I relate to these things these kids are talking about. So that
Hmm.
was all really cool. We've since partnered with a variety of other programs. Um, usually it's not a full scale school, as was the
Yeah.
case with Buxton. It might be a program of 20 or 30 students that maybe has chapters at a couple of colleges. We've had churches buy phones as more of a collective thing. I do think one thing we learned from Buxton and these groups in general is there is a power. And I know Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about this in the anxious generation. It's not just take your kid off, because then there's all this social pressure of he doesn't have smartphone but everyone else does, and it
Yeah.
can actually exacerbate some of these problems. But if everyone's on the same playing field, it really has the best chance at really kind of having a successful positive impact.
Yeah.
There's probably a mix of things from like accountability. If like other kids are doing it and you don't want to, you want to see it through. Um, and I think also like a lot of these clubs are self-initiated.
Yeah.
It's not that, I mean, but in the case of Buxton, it was not self-initiated. The school was literally saying smartphones are banned on campus, which is not always the best way to convince someone to try something. But I think if someone is eager to try to make a change, then you have this support system, whether that's a club or, even just like we tried to make it as affordable as possible, often using used phones and really, just trying to basically just sell them for cost to kick off these experiments, so that, that wasn't another hurdle. And it's been really exciting to see at scale what happens when a community comes together. I'm also really interested to see how some of these laws might pan out and what that might mean for light phones. We haven't really had any conversations in a tangible way with any sort of politicians or
Yeah.
government bodies, but it's something we're kind of keeping our, peripheral vision on to see what opportunities may arise.
I mean, last week, since the announcement of Lightphone 3, LAUSD just voted to ban smartphones starting in January of 2025, like in the middle of the school year. So I think it's about to get very interesting. Um, the timing, obviously, with the release is I guess, non-coincidental. It's kind of like a reminder that the universe is a hologram in that sense. But again, to have LAUSD vote to ban smartphones, New York might not be far behind. It's going to get really interesting, I think. So yeah, to be continued on that front. I mean, there's going to be a lot to be explored. There's just going to be a lot to confront, not just for the individual, for the student, for the parent, for the educator, for the school staff, maybe even for the politician as well. But when we start to when we start to joggle the smartphone away from our hands, if just for short periods of time, that's when you recognize, again, within this sort of ethos of slow tech, like if we introduce like some basic level of somatics and self-awareness and sort of thinking about emotional intelligence a little bit, everything is right there, right beneath the surface, that if we just put the phone away for a few minutes, we can start to actually feel and recognize and give language to what's actually going on. So I think, with that being said, it's 2025 is going to be a really interesting bellwether for all this. Thank you so much for being the first guest here at Slow Tech. I really look forward to bringing you back once we cross that threshold in the coming months. I hope that that this cycle that you're in, this sort of like pre-delivering cycle, is continues to be expansive and informative, and rewarding in whatever possible way. It's been really interesting to like have these conversations in these particular moments of time when the world was different, continues to be different, and will always remain to be different, and to also have our correspondence through email to take that kind of internet friend